اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي على له كل شيء. يا نور يا قدوس يا نور يا قدوس يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحت كل عصام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعم. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تقطع الرجاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء. اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلحمني ذكرك. اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضعا متذللا خاشعا أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضعا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا. اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت طاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته وعزم فيهما عندك رغبته. اللهم عزم سلطانه وعلى مكانه وخفي مكروه وزهر أمره وغلب قهره وجلت قدرته ولا يمكن ولا لقضائه ساطرا ولا لشيء من عمل الخبيث بالحسن مبدلا غيرك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي ظلمت نفسي ظلمت نفسي وتجرعت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لمنك علي. اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترت وكم من فادح من البلاء قلت وكم من أسار وقيت وكم من مكروه دفعت وكم من ثناء جميلا لست أهلا له نشرت. اللهم عزم بلائي وعفرت بسوء حالي وقصرت بي أعمالي وقعدت بي أغلالي وحبسني عن نفعي بعد أعمالي وخدتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بجنايتها ومثالي. يا سيدي وأسألك بعزتك أن لا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وعساتي والدوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكسرة شهواتي وغفلتي وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال ضعوفا وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا. إلهي وربي من لي غيرك أسأله كشف ضري والنزل في أمري. إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما طبعت في هوى نفسي ولم أحترس فيه من تزين وضوئي فغرني بمحوى وأسأله على ذلك القضاء فتجاوزت بما جاء علي من ذلك بعد حدودك وخالفت بعض أوامرك فلك الحجة علي في جميع ذلك ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاء. وألزمني حكمك وبلاغك وقد آتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستقيلا مستغفرا منيبا مقرا مزعلا معترفا لا أجد مفرا من مكان مني ولا مخضعا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري مع إدخالك إياي في سعة من رحمتك. اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شري وفكني من شد وساقي. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عزمي يا من بدا خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي هبني لابتداء كرمك وصالح برك يا إلهي وسيدي وربي. أتراك معذب بنارك بعد توحيدك وبعد ما انطبع عليه قلبي من معرفتك ولهج بي لساني من ذكرك وعذبه زميلي من حبك وبعد صدق اعترافي بدعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك. هيهات أن تكرم من أن تضيع من ربيته أو تبعد من أدنيته أو تشرد من نويته أو تسلم إلا البراهين منك كفيت ورحمت وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي تسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدا وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقة وبشكرك ماضها وعلى قلوبنا ترفعت بناحيتك محققا وعلى ضمائر هوت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعا وعلى جوارها سعت الأوطان تعبدك غاية وأشارت باستغفارك مزعنا ما هكذا الظن بك ولا أخبرنا بفضلك يا كريم يا رب يا كريم يا رب يا كريم يا رب وأنت تعلم ضعفي قليلا من البلاء الدنيا وقباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها ألا أن ذلك بلاء مكروها قليلا مقصور يسير بقاه قصيرا مدته فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض يا سيدي فكيف بي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الضليل الحقير المسكين المستكين يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي أي الأمور إليك أشكو ولم من هذا الجوع بكر العليم العذاب وشدته أم لطول البلاء ومدته فلعن سيرتني لقوبات مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بين أحبائك وأوليائك وهبني إلهي وسيدي مولاي ربي صبرت على عذابك فكيف أصبر على فراقك وهبني صبرت على حر نارك فكيف أصبر على النزل إلى كرامتك أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي يفوق بعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا عند ركني ناطقا أزد جنة إليك بين أهلها ضجيج العاملين ولا أصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين ولا أبكين عليك بقاء الفاقدين ولو نادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين يا غياث آمال العارفين يا غياث المستغيثين يا غياث المستغيثين يا غياث المستغيثين يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين ويا إله العالمين أفتراك سبحانك إلهي وبحمدك تسمع في صوت عبد مسلما سجن فيه بمخالفتي وضعقت عذابها بمعصيته وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته وهو يدج إليك دتيجا معملا رحمته ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيده ويتوسل إليك بربوبيته يا مولاي فكيف يبقي في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك أم كيف تعلمه النار وهو يعمل فضلك ورحمتك أم كيف يهرق لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه أم كيف يشتمل عليه سفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفه أم كيف يتقلقل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقه أم كيف تسجده زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا رب أم كيف يرجو فضلك في إثمه منها فتتركه فيها هيهات ما ذلك الظن بك ولا المعروف من فضلك ولا مشبع لما عملت بالموحدين من برك وإحسانك فباليقين أقطع لو لما حكمت به من تعزير جاحديك وقضيت به من إخلاط معانديك لجعلت نار كلها بردا وسلاما وما كان لأحد فيه مقرا ولا مقاما لكنك تقدست أسماؤك وأقسمت أن تمنحها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين وأن تجل سنا وقلت مبتدعا وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما فمن كان مؤمنا كان فاسقا ليسمعون إلهي وسيدي وأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها بالقضية التي هتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريتها أنت هب في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته وكل ذنب أذنبت وكل قبيح أسررت وكل جهل عملت كتمت أو أعلنت وأخفيت أو أظهرت وكل سيئة أمرت بإسقاطها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جماله وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم برحمتك أخفيت وفضلك وسترت وأن تعفو حظي من كل خير تنزله أو إحسان تفضلوا أو بر تنشروا أو رزق تبسطوا أو ذنب تغفروا أو خطأ تستروا يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي مالك ربي من بيده ناصيتي يا عليما بضري ومسكنتي يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب أسألك بحقك وقدسك وعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي في الليل والنهار بذكرك مأمورا وبخدمتك موصولا وأعمالي عندك مقبولا حتى تكون أعمالي وأرادي كلها وردا واحدا وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا يا سيدي يا من عليه معولي يا من إليه شكوت حوالي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب قوي على خدمتك جواره وأشدد على العزيمة جوانه وحبل الجد في خشيتك والدوام في اتصال بخدمتك حتى أسرع إليك في ميادين السابقين وأسرع إليك في المغامرين وأشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين وخافك مخافة الموقنين وأجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين اللهم ومن أرادني بالسوء فرد ومن كادني فكد واجعلني من إحسان عبيدك نصيبا عندك وقر بهم منزلة من وخسهم زلفة لديك فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك وجلي بجودك وعاطف علي بمجدك واحفظني برحمتك واجعل لساني بذكرك لحجا وقلبي بحبك مطيما ومن علي بحسن إجابتك وأقل أسرتي واغفر ضلتي فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك وأمرتهم بدعائك وزمنت لهم الإجابة فإليك يا ربي نصبت وجهي وإليك يا ربي مددت يدي فبعزتك استجب لدعائي وبلغني منايا ولا تقطع من فضلك ورجائي واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي يا سريع الرضا يا سريع الرضا يا سريع الرضا اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء فإنك فعال لما تشاء يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته غنى ارحم من راسه ماله الرجاء وسلاه القاء يا سابغا النعم يا دافعا النقام يا نور المستوحشين في الظلام يا عالما لا يعلم صل على محمد وآل محمد وافعل بما أنت أهله وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا يا اللهم صل على
عليكم شيخ.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
الله when you're ready.
Thank you. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. الخطبة 27 وقد قالها يستنهض بها الناس حين ورد خبر غزو الأنبار بجيش معاوية فلم ينهضوا. Khutbah number 27 has to also do with the tough times that Amir al-Mu'mineen had to go through. Khutbah, if you remember, khutbah number 25 was talking about a similar theme, and it was also about Imam Ali complaining about the people of Kufa. Here also you have the same thing. Now this khutbah that we're going to get into, inshallah, it's not very short. It's not too long, but it's not too short either. In khutbah number 25, in the intro to that khutbah, it was explained how that time period between the battle of Nahrawan and the battle and the shahada of Amirul Mu'minin alayhi salam, that time period, which is not too long of a time period, that time period was very tough on Imam Ali alayhi salam. Why? For different reasons, but one of the main reasons is that Muawiyah noticed that when the Kufans are not really interested in fighting anymore against him, he took advantage of that opportunity. He made the most of it. He started sending strike units, if you may, to go, units, armies, little armies, to go strike parts of Muslim lands and retreat back to Sham. And to doing this to instill instability in those lands that Imam Ali was governing over, alayhi salam, and put fear in the hearts of the people. You know, when there's fear, then it doesn't matter how good your country is doing. It doesn't matter how good your economy is. Look, when the people don't feel secure, they give up on a lot of things. It really takes a very strong hit at a country, at a state, when there is this fear and insecurity that people have. So Muawiyah knows this and he keeps doing this. And so in khutbah number 25, we went through this very much in detail of all the different strikes that he had, the strikes of the different armies they took. They would strike and go back. And there it was revolving around an individual by the name of Busr bin Artah or Busr bin Abi Artah, whichever one. In this khutbah, once again, and look, by the way, that time period is when the gharat took place. Gharat is the plural of ghara, right? And we have this in Farsi as well, gharat, which means to loot and plunder. And so what happened is that in this time period is when all of this looting, attacking, and instability is taking place. After Nahrawan, before the Shahada of Amirul Mu'minin alayhi salam. And really, I say this again and again, that if a person wants to understand what Imam al-Hasan went through and how hard the situation and circumstances were for Imam al-Hasan, they have to read about this time period between Imam Ali alayhi salam's Shahada and the Battle of Nahrawan. This time period is a very tough time period. And they'll understand that right in the middle of all of this that was happening, Imam Ali becomes Shaheed. And so Imam Hassan has to take over in the worst of times, really, in the hardest of circumstances. So there were people, as there always are people who don't understand the circumstances and want to jump to conclusions. There were people who jumped to conclusions during Imam Hassan's time as well. And they really called him out on this the ceasefire that he had with Muawiyah. But that's a discussion for another time. Now, here what we have is, and there's a book written on this time period. The title is Gharat, as a matter of fact, Al-Gharat. And I'm not that good with names, but if I remember correctly, his name is Abu Ishaq al-Thaqafi al-Kufi. Who is the author of this book. It's a famous book, and it is one of the sources of history when it comes to when it comes to compiling books of history. This is one of those main sources that is referred to. Of course, he's seen as a Shia, and but in that book he has mentioned all of these different things that took place in that time period. So it is one of those sources that is very valuable. Because it is one of the very old books that we have, and alhamdulillah, it's been preserved till today. Anyway, that book is called Al-Gharat. Now, here, Imam Ali in this khutbah is addressing one of those attacks that took place. But if khutbah number 25 was about regarding a person by the name of Busr bin Artah, who was very famous and everyone knows how bloodthirsty he was, you will have another person, another individual here in this khutbah that is mentioned. And we'll get to him later. I don't want to get into him now. For now, what I want to do is, once again, give a little introduction, because Sayyid al-Radi himself gives an introduction to this khutbah. And this khutbah, by the way, is one of those famous khutbahs of Nahjul Balagha. It is very famous. Famous in the sense of we've heard bits and pieces of it here and there, even if you're, not very much into reading. Maybe if you listen to lectures and so on, you'll hear about this khutbah. Parts of it we've heard about. Like, for example, the part that Imam Ali says, alayhi salam, he says, when he finds out that they've stolen an anklet from a non-Muslim who is living in his lands, and is in his jurisdiction, he says that, if a person hears this and dies, I won't blame them. That's how sad this news is. These kinds of things, and other parts of it that are also famous, where he tells the Kufans, Ya ashbah ar-rijal, you people who look like men but you're not men. Anyway, this khutbah is famous in that sense. Of us we've heard bits and pieces of it here and there in lectures, but at the same time, it's also famous in the sense of it being one of those khutbahs that has been mentioned in a lot of other sources that precede Nahjul Balagha in their date and time. I think they've mentioned up to about 10, 12 maybe books that were before Nahjul Balagha that have mentioned this khutbah and brought it. Not to mention that it's also in Usul al-Kafi as well, which is great. It's in one of the chapters of Usul al-Kafi as well. I checked and I found it there. And so this khutbah really stands out. And so I think personally, it's one of those khutbahs because of this nature of it, that it is really widely accepted. We can try to draw as many conclusions as we want from it. Okay, so in the introduction to this khutbah, Sayyid al-Radi, he says that he delivered this khutbah when he was trying to encourage the people and push the people, actually, to rise and stand up and resist against the forces of Muawiyah. He tries to get these people to go and fight Muawiyah. Why? When he hears about the Battle of Al-Anbar. Okay, so Al-Anbar today, it refers to a province, one of the big provinces of Iraq, actually. Maybe it takes up half of Iraq, or 1/3 of Iraq. It's pretty big. It's a pretty big province. Now, back then, though, apparently it was a city on the borders between Sham, yes, that day, the Sham of that day, and Iraq, right? But it was part of the jurisdiction of Imam Ali alayhi salam. Okay, so he hears about this, and we'll talk about that battle a little bit. We'll get to it. Let me just finish the introduction that Sayyid al-Radi gives here. He says, وَفِيهَا يَذْكُرُ فَضْلَ الْجِهَادِ. In this khutbah, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he mentions how great it is to fight in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he is pushing for the people to get up and stand and resist. He also mentions in this khutbah his knowledge of battle and the art of battle. Yes, and also he mentions to them and brings to their attention what happens if they don't obey him in this command of getting up and resisting and fighting back against Muawiyah. All right, so it's going to be, it's a long khutbah, as I said, not very long, but not very short either. We need to talk about it, inshallah, and I'll talk about, well, let me say that right now. It's divided into 4 parts. If we want to have like an overview of the whole khutbah, it's 4 parts, 4 main parts, yeah, I would say. The first part being about the importance of fighting in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course, in the eloquent way that Imam Ali alayhi salam mentions. And then also, the second part is where he is going to be scolding the people of Kufa. Now, we're getting used to this. In khutbah number 25, he did a lot of that. But again, in khutbah 27, he's doing that again. He is really scolding the people of Kufa and the Kufans. And then he starts speaking about the one who has attacked Al-Anbar. So we'll talk about that inshallah. And the martyrdom of his governor there and his representative there. People who we've never heard their names, but they attained shahada in the hardest ways, maybe even. That's the second part. Third part, Imam Ali goes back again to scolding the people of Iraq, and usually when they say the people of Iraq, meaning the people of Kufa again, because they were that was where the main population followers of Imam Ali were. So he scolds the Kufans of that time, and then in the fourth and last section of this khutbah, he announces his readiness to fight against this bloodthirsty enemy and merciless enemy of Islam. And he also talks about his past and his reputation when it comes to the art of war and the art of battle, and he reminds the people who he is. Now it's interesting how it's really interesting how Imam Ali alayhi salam, of all people, has to be the one who reminds others of how good he is when it comes to battle. And it's also interesting that he has to do this not just because 25 years have passed and maybe people have forgotten, how he would fight. Because 25 years when he was not Khalifa, I don't think we have any reports of him getting involved in any of the battles that happened, and any of the wars that happened during his time, during the time after the Prophet. We have to remember that after the Prophet, there were a lot of conquests that took place by the order of the first three khulafa. Lots of them happened in the time of the second Khalifa, you can say. Some of the biggest successes, we'll call it, although there's more to talk about when it comes to this. This itself is a topic, actually, of discussion, that the conquests of Islam, how were they sanctioned by the Imams and so on, or Imam Ali namely, or not? That's a different discussion itself. And these futuhat, as they call it, are a matter of contention amongst some, whether Imam Ali was for them or against them and so on. That's a separate discussion. But what is kind of for sure, if not for sure, is that Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam didn't partake in any of these conquests. Other great Sahaba did. Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas, for example, he was involved in them. Others were involved as well. But Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam, from what I remember, I'm pretty sure about this, he didn't take part in any of those battles. So maybe the people after 25 years have forgotten, you would say, Amir al-Mu'minin and how good he was at battle. But the thing is, what refutes this kind of is that they've seen him in the battle of Jamal. They've seen him in the battle of Siffin and Nahrawan. So I don't know what these people are thinking. It's very sad that Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam, it's reached a point where he has to prove himself. This is unacceptable, really. It's unacceptable, but this is what happens when people aren't thinking properly. So yes, let's get to the story actually behind this whole khutbah. It says that in this khutbah, it says that they came to Amir al-Mu'minin with the news of the army of Muawiyah attacking Al-Anbar. As I said, it's one of those, back then at least, it was one of those cities that was on the border between, if you go look it up right now, just type in maps, Google Maps or something, you type up Al-Anbar, A-L, and then A-N space A-N-B-A-R. It'll bring it up for you. When you actually go on maps, you'll see it's a big province nowadays, right? But you can easily tell if you zoom in on Karbala, Najaf, and of course Kufa is stuck to Najaf. So back then, you'll find that there was Kufa, Najaf, where Imam Ali was. Of course, there was no Najaf back then, it was Kufa. Between that area and Syria of today, you'll find Al-Anbar province. So my guess is, in this Anbar province, back then, there was a city called Al-Anbar all the way towards the border of Sham and Syria of today. Right? There was no Anbar province maybe back then, it was a city. But once again, I'm not sure about that. But this is what the books have said, that back then it was a city, not a big province, a huge province, but a city on the border of Sham and Iraq. Okay, so now it says that when Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam, he hears this, right? What has happened and what had happened. We'll get to that. When he hears about this, he gets very angry, and he makes his way from Kufa to a place called Nukhayla. Well, that's where usually maybe people would gather, armies would gather before they would go out. A place by the name of Nukhayla. And so it says that he was so angry that his cloak, his aba, was dragging on the ground as he was going. Okay, and so people see this, and Amir al-Mu'minin is angry, so they start following him. They follow him to Nukhayla, which was as I said, is probably a place where the army would gather to go from there out to battle whenever they needed to. So it's probably on the outskirts of Kufa. So Amir al-Mu'minin says goes on a high point and begins to speak. Now another narration says that he was not feeling too good. So he goes, but he writes something and has someone else recite the khutbah while he's listening to it because he couldn't speak out loud. Of course, this is before his shahada, this is before him getting struck by Ibn Muljam as well. So don't think that he wasn't feeling well because of that. He might have just been ill or something like that. I don't know exactly. And I couldn't find anything that said what's going on exactly here. So anyway, so what has made Amir al-Mu'minin so angry? Just like he was angry in khutbah number 25 because of what happened with Busr bin Artah and how he had attacked different really parts of the lands that were under his rule, under Amir al-Mu'minin's rule, alayhi salam. Here also there's a person by the name of Sufyan bin Auf al-Ghamidi, which in the khutbah itself, Imam Ali refers to him as Akhu Ghamid. All right. And we'll get to that inshallah, not in this session, but maybe in future sessions. But anyway, this person by the name of Sufyan bin Auf al-Ghamidi, what's the story? The story is that he has attacked by the order of Muawiyah al-Anbar, and he has returned to Sham. So here, Ibn Abil Hadid, he has explained and actually quoted a dialogue between Muawiyah and this Sufyan bin Auf al-Ghamidi. Okay, I'm just going to read and translate as I go through this so that you see what the idea was. So we get an idea. I already explained this in khutbah number 25, but again here it shows itself again how Muawiyah knew what he's doing, how he knew what the priorities are when it comes to weakening the opposition, right? What to exactly do. Okay, so it says that Sufyan bin Auf, he says that Muawiyah summoned me, and he says, I'm going to send you with a great army, a grand army towards the Furat, that river of Furat. When you reach the land of Heat, or Hait, I'm not sure how it's pronounced here, Ha, Ya, and Ta. I didn't check it, I'm sorry. It doesn't really matter. And it's a little bit above, they say, Al-Anbar, okay? He says, when you get there, if you find an army of Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam there, I want you to attack them. But if you don't find anyone there, move forward and advance to Anbar itself and attack Anbar. If there's no army there, then continue to advance to Madain. Yes, Al-Madain is where Salman al-Farsi is buried. I want you to advance to Al-Madain and attack there. Now, when he says this, if there's no army, okay, if there's no army, there's no army. But brothers and sisters, we have to remember there are people living here. And so when you're sending an army there, what is that army going to do? Well, we'll see. He says, I want you to go advance, advance, advance. So if you get resistance, I want you to stop there, as if Muawiyah is saying. But if you don't get resistance by any army or anything, I want you to advance more to Madain even. And then strike there, go back to Sham. But be careful, he says, according to this report. Don't get close to Kufa. Right? He says, don't get close to Kufa. And know that if attacking Anbar and Madain itself is like attacking Kufa. As I said, like the main population and help that Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam had was in Kufa. And so he knows this. He says, look, don't get close to Kufa. That's not the point. We're not trying to defeat Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. We're trying to strike fear in the hearts of everybody. We're trying to bring about instability. Now, of course, these are things, once again, that the Shi'i school believes in. And there are some of Ahl Sunnah who don't look at Muawiyah as a great Sahabi either, and so they will also have a lot of negativity for him and against him. But there will be a lot who will dismiss all of this history that we're talking about right now. Once they might say it's not in our books, or they might say, for example, Ibn Abil Hadid, we see him as a Shia. Inshallah, one day, I don't know if we'll ever get a chance. Ibn Abil Hadid, there's an interesting discussion about him that no, he's not Shia. Just because you don't hate Ali ibn Abi Talib and you don't love Muawiyah doesn't mean you're Shia. This is one reason why a lot of people are labeled with Shia. But in those contexts and in those books, you will have Shi'i, you will have Rafidi, you will have Ghali fil Rafd, right? You'll have these different terms, and so anyway, that's a different story. I don't want to get into that right now. But anyway, this is from Ibn Abil Hadid. And so some people might say, no, Muawiyah would have never done such a thing. Okay, whatever. But for us, our historians, they have their own sources that they go to and try to be and everyone, of course, tries to be as objective as possible. All right. So anyway, going back to this dialogue that's happening here, Muawiyah tells him, know that if you attack Anbar and Madain, which are two important cities, that's enough. That's like you've attacked Kufa. So don't worry about it. Don't worry about Kufa. We're not after Ali ibn Abi Talib right now. He says this is enough to shake the heart of the people of Iraq, right? Namely, the followers of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, and it will make our friends happy and our allies happy. Okay. Now this is the sad part. He says, in this journey of yours that you go on, anyone you find that doesn't believe in my hukuma, in me being ruler, me being khalifa, yeah, right, you take their life, no problem. Okay. And all of those little cities, villages that you will pass by on your way to Anbar, to Madain, I want you to destroy them. And I want you to loot them as well, of whatever wealth there you find there. Because when you take the people's wealth in these little cities, villages, and all of that, it's like you're killing them. Now, once again, I mean, let's just open up a parenthesis here. We have to understand, brothers and sisters, back then, and even today in more deprived parts of the world, when you set fields, when you set orchards on fire, when you destroy the water of a city or a village, it's not going to be that easy for them to bounce back. Yes. Here, if your tap water stops, for example, it's cut off, you go buy some, I don't know, you go buy some bottled water. You go to someone else's house. I mean, at the end of the day, there's ways to bounce back. Back then, though, it was different. When Muawiyah, he says, if you destroy these cities, right, and turn them upside down, it's just like you've killed the people there that are there. So even if they flee and run away and spare and save their own lives, it's like they're dead. Where do they have to go? Yeah. And this is enough to put be a big pain for and a problem for our enemies. So now, what does Sufyan bin Auf do? It says that he carried out this command of Muawiyah. And once again, it's sad, and Amir al-Mu'mineen will say this later on in the khutbah as well. It is so sad that the ones who are the enemy, the ones who are on falsehood and batil, they obey their imam or leader, whatever you want to call him, while the ones who are on haqq don't obey their leader. Yeah, it reminds me of when the battle of Khandaq, when Amr bin Abd Wad, that champion of the mushrikeen, jumps over the trench of Khandaq, yeah, the battle of the trench. What does he say? He really, tests the people. Although he's one of the mushrikeen, He's the one to test the people. He says, look, who's willing to fight me? Whoever fights me and dies is shaheed according to you all and has Jannah. And whoever defeats me, it's a great, ibadah and form of worship that they've done. So what are you worried about? And we all know that Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam is the only one who steps forward 3 times to say that he'll fight Amr. And eventually he defeats Amr, and there's a beautiful story there that we usually have heard. But anyway, coming back to what we were talking about, here also, it's interesting. The ones who are on the haqq, they don't obey their imam. Come on, people. Like, because if you die on this path, then you are going straight to Jannah, inshallah. And if you are victorious, then all the better, yeah? So what do you have to lose, in other words? Anyway, it says Sufyan carried out this order of his imam, his leader, Muawiyah. And so when he reached Anbar, he fought against Hassan bin Hassan. So if you remember, I said Amir al-Mu'mineen, when he heard that they have gone to Anbar and they've killed his representative or his governor, whoever was there on his behalf, is Hassan, this person by the name of Hassan bin Hassan. Okay, so they didn't have what it takes to defeat this army of Sufyan. So what it says here is that, what did he do? Although he knew he can't defeat them, he did what he could. And when those people from Sham, the army of Sham, comes forward, he resisted. And they fought well, it said. I mean, they fought well, but at the end of the day, and they were able to repel them actually. But at the end of the day, these people were too many in number. If you remember, in the beginning of that dialogue between Muawiyah and Sufyan, Muawiyah says, I'm sending you with a grand army, a big army, right? Because Muawiyah knew that, this is an important one. This is an important attack that needs to be done. So he's going to have to send proper resources for that. Anyway, it says that because they were so high in number, Hassan sees that, okay, we're not going to be able to defeat this army of Sham that's here. And so him and his companions got ready for Shahada. This is the part that I was talking about, that, these great shuhada, these martyrs of Islam, who we never even hear of. Who is Hassan bin Hassan? We've never heard of him. Alhamdulillah, at least we have Nahjul Balagha. Some of these things will come up when we're discussing a book like Nahjul Balagha. Hassan bin Hassan, rahmatullah alayh. It says that when he noticed that it's over, like we're not going to be able to defeat these guys, he made the decision to fight till death, yeah? And he told those around him as well that, look, we are going to die here. And so whoever, it just reminds you of the way Imam Hussein did things. Yeah, he says, whoever just doesn't want Shahada, while we're fighting, they can run away. But we're going to stay here, we're going to resist, we're going to fight. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. But whoever is looking for Shahada, stay with us. It says he dismounted his horse and he fought, and he recited the verse in Surah Ahzab, verse 23, that the famous verse that usually people who are fighting in the way of Allah will recite, مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ رِجَالٌ صَدَقُوا مَا عَاهَدُوا اللَّهَ عَلَيْهِ فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ قَضَى نَحْبَهُ وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَنْتَظِرُ وَمَا بَدَّلُوا تَبْدِيلًا. Yeah, that there are of the believers, there are some men who live up to their promise, to Allah, their oath to Allah, and they fight in the way of Allah. And some of them will reach Shahada and martyrdom, and there are others who are still waiting for their time to come. Yeah. So it says he dismounted his horse, he fought on foot. 30 people with him also fought on foot. So that's really a small number, and they all, in Farsi we say Sharbat Shahadat Nushidand. They drank from that cup of Shahada. Yeah. And so this is what is reported to Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, the death of his companion, his representative in Anbar. And so this is where he gets very upset, and he goes, why is he upset though? It's not just that he's upset that this has happened, although that is one thing that makes him upset. But once we look at the khutbah and the way he begins his khutbah, and the way that he is pushing the people, first of all, reminding them of how important it is to fight in the way of Allah, you can tell that he's upset at the fact that these people are not willing to aid him, as I said again and again in khutbah number 25 when we were covering it. So I'm going to start it. I'm going to start the khutbah, but we're not going to get too far. Maybe one line or two lines of it we'll go through, and I'm going to leave the rest, inshallah, for our next session. He begins by saying, Amma ba'd, after he praises Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and probably sends his salawat upon the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, Amma ba'd, okay, let's talk business now. Let's talk what's going on. Amma ba'd, فَإِنَّ الْجِهَادَ بَابٌ مِنْ أَبْوَابِ الْجَنَّةِ. He reminds them, look people, we are here in this world, in this dunya, okay, to get to Jannah, right? If this is the purpose of our creation, to reach ultimate felicity, ultimate happiness, ultimate pleasure that never ends, that never dies, where there is no death, if we've been brought here to get to that, okay, there's a destination, there's a location called Jannah. Okay, there are gates to this Jannah, there are doors to this Jannah. Whoever wants to get to them has to go through the proper gate and door, right? So let me let you know, one of the gates of Jannah, one of the doors of Jannah is Babul al-Jihad. Yeah, fighting in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, struggling in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, some people here have tried to say that what is meant by this struggle, it is the major struggle and the minor struggle. When you're fighting against the physical enemy and you're fighting the self. I personally think that that is something to say. Fighting the self meaning going against one's haram desires, right? You know, based on that famous story of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, who was coming back from a battle, and he reminded the people that, look, we're coming back from the smaller and minor struggle. The major struggle is left. And the people asked, what is the minor? What is the major struggle? He said, you know, fighting against the self and those carnal haram desires of oneself, right? Anyway, some have said that what is meant by jihad here is both, but I personally, based, you know, just looking at the context of this khutbah and the history of it, I personally think he's talking about only about going and fighting the physical enemy, right? Not the struggle against the self. Anyway, whichever you choose, what's for sure is that the physical fighting here is for sure what is meant. Now, maybe there's an addition to that or not, that's a different story. Okay. It says Jannah has a door that is for this purpose, those who fight in the way of Allah. And there's a hadith also by Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam. There's many hadiths actually, but another hadith that actually says that there's an actual gate with a sign on it, kind of, you know, that says Babul Jannah. One of is one is the one that's for the Mujahideen. Lil Jannati Babun yuqalu lahu Babul Mujahideen. There's a door that's called the door of those who fought in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they enter through that. Yamduna ilayh فإذا هو مفتوح وهم متقلدون بسيوفهم. That they enter, they go to it and they find it to be open for them while they are carrying their swords with them. Now, of course, this is probably metaphorical, which kind of is illustrating the fact that they were always ready to put their lives on the right line for Allah, and they actually did, and they probably lost their lives in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They find the door open while they are carrying their swords, while everyone else is still being judged. So it seems that because of the great sacrifices that they made, now it's going to be easy for them. وَالْمَلَائِكَةُ تُرَحِّبُ بِهِمْ, and the angels are welcoming them. Now, I do have to say something here, which is pretty important. We all know, the Quran says it, talks about those who have lost their lives in the way of Allah. We know the greatness of, you know, this matter. People who lose their lives. Recently, there have been more explosions here and there. And the people have lost their lives again. And fighting in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala during the Prophet's time, during Imam Ali's time, and after that, These things are these are things that we're aware of, both the Shia school of thought, the Sunni school of thought. I just want to say this now. Just because we know that something like this is very important and all, it's not that we have to sometimes create it for ourselves, create the opportunity for ourselves when it's not the time for it either. All right. This is what happened with, extreme groups like ISIS, young people who want to find a quick way to God, it seemed. And I say this based on when you listen to them, some of them that had been captured, they've been brainwashed by, I don't know, by their scholars or whoever. And so these people, you would feel like, they're looking for an excuse to fight a fight that's not necessary. Why? Because they've been brainwashed. And they're young, they have that zeal, they want to do something, they want to make a difference, they want to be special even, I don't know. Just because there is something like this, and it's unfortunate that they've given a bad name to this term of jihad. Just because there is something like that during the Prophet's time, after the Prophet's time, it doesn't mean that you have to create it for yourself when it's not even necessary. What is really important is to be a servant of God and to obey Him the way He wants to be obeyed. Yeah. If there's a time where there is no room for something like this, okay, I have to be successful and victorious in the greater struggle, which is fighting myself, my nafs, my desires. Yeah. Didn't we say that is the greater struggle? Yeah. Sometimes it'll be both the minor struggle and the major struggle. Sometimes it'll be the physical enemy outside. Sometimes it'll be the enemy within me. Yeah. But it's very important to be able to identify the enemy that has to be fought against. Yeah. A lot of times in this day and age, some weird things happen in the name of something like this. And things are complicated for no reason for the rest of the Muslims in the world. A unnecessarily bad image is given to Islam, given to the Holy Prophet ﷺ, as a result of what? As a result of some people who just want to find a quick way to God. If there is no opportunity, then you have to go back to the major struggle, which is fighting the nafs. I don't know what's wrong with some people. Anyway, this is a door. Imam, let's go back to the khutbah now. It says, this is a door of the doors of Jannah. فَتَحَهُ اللَّهُ لِخَاصَّةِ أَوْلِيَائِهِ. That Allah has opened this door for those very special servants of His. Okay, what does this mean? Once again, there's different interpretations of it, but personally what I find convincing for myself is when it says that He has opened this door for His chosen ones, for the special ones, it's just like any other form of worship, that not everyone gets the chance to be succeeds to do and accomplish, right? There are so many believers out there, but how many of them are successful in praying on time, for example? We will say that this is a blessing that Allah blesses His chosen servants with. Salatul Layl, for example, yeah, that is a blessing that not everyone gets a chance. Those who do get the chance to do it, maybe because throughout the day they're also refraining from sins, refraining from wrong and evil, and Allah, out of His love, gives them the opportunity to get up in the middle of the night, maybe every now and then, or maybe even every night. I mean, that's really a big blessing. If Allah blesses them with this, we say Allah has blessed them, Allah has chosen them, or else everyone who's a believer not necessarily is a chosen one, in the sense of being able to accomplish a lot and make major strides when it comes to spiritual growth and that spirituality and spiritual wayfaring, right? So one of those big, great forms of ibadah is this fighting in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when the time is right, of course, when the time is right, not for the people that I was talking about. There are some people who just want to force it to happen anytime, in any place, anytime. There should be a chance for me to do it. No, not necessarily. So here also when he says, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he says this is a door Allah has opened for His chosen ones, meaning the ones who really were chosen in the sense of They did their part. Allah gave them the opportunity, and they made the most of it. And they lost their lives in this way, in the way of Allah, in the way of defending their Prophet, in the way of defending their Imam, their people. Yeah. And so they lost their lives in that way. That makes them chosen ones. Yeah. Not everyone has that opportunity. Okay. That was like maybe the first line of the khutbah. The most important part was to give that introduction, and so that we have a good understanding of what the context of this khutbah is. And after this, the Imam continues as well, speaking of the merits of fighting in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, especially against someone like Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan. Inshallah, in our next session, we'll continue this khutbah. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And salams to everyone who is saying salam in the chat box. Brother Khurshid and Sister Zainab and Brother Arshad. Thank you so much for tuning in. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.